Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today I've got a very special guest and we're going to be doing a deep dive into all things occult, UFOs, demonology, these entities and all the secret societies and how this ties into possibly one phenomenon, particularly with news headlines. They seem to be pushing the UFO phenomenon and this three-eye atlas stuff more than ever at the moment. But we welcome to the show Nathaniel Gillis, who's a researcher, and you've been doing some fantastic work in this area. So welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you.
Why don't you give the viewers a bit of a background of kind of how you got into all this stuff, and then we'll get into how your opinion might have changed over the years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So I got into this field because I grew up in a haunted house. I was 8 years old. My parents moved into a new home, and that's when I saw my first full-bodied apparition. I heard disembodied voices speaking to each other at nighttime, and I just didn't want to be crazy. I knew I wasn't crazy. I mean, for a little bit, I knew I wasn't crazy. And I just wanted answers to the questions I harbor deep within me. So that's my origin story. And as you know, growing up, I should say, in church, I was constantly bugging my leadership for answers. What's going on in my life? I'm seeing shadow figures in my room, Mr. Pastor, Mr. Youth Pastor. What is going on here? Can you give me some kind of context as to what they are? And that's when I realized that even though these individuals in my life seemed to have all the answers, they didn't even have the right questions. And so that's what kind of led me into the field head on. And since then, I've spoken internationally. I've worked with some of the best researchers in the world, not because I'm anything, it's just because a lot of us are getting tired with the mainstream narratives.
Mm.
We know we're being lied to, and so there's kind of a group within the field that I'm a part of, and we're like, throw all the data on the table. Let's sit with the question, and maybe we'll get better answers. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, and we were going to really dive into how, like you said, the mainstream narrative and certain things are being pushed to maybe create this fear of, aliens or UFOs. But
Yeah.
all throughout history, every civilization and culture has spoken about, spirits
Hmm.
or entities and kind of been aware of the spiritual world. But it's kind of a
Right.
modern phenomenon, isn't it, in the West that we don't really acknowledge it, and a lot of people think this
Yeah.
is all kind of woo woo.
Yeah. Honestly, and we do here in the States that it's all woo woo. It's what do they call it? Taboo. And it's sad because a lot of the data is trapped within experiences and experiencers. And for the longest time, even in my own career in research, there was a lot of people that had these stories, that had data, that had photographs, and they were kind of hiding in the shadows because they had nobody that would fight for them. And so they don't want to be told they're crazy.
Hmm.
And that's what was happening. And even to go deeper with that, they weren't being told they're crazy, they were just being ignored entirely, where the data did not fit the narrative that mainstream paranormal or ufology even wanted to push. And so it's like, well, if you're not crazy, you just simply don't exist. There's no box for you to check.
Yeah.
So we're not even going to listen to your testimony. And that's where the real data is, in my opinion. I know that because for the last 5 years, I've been working with experiencers
Yeah.
who have the most mind-boggling, most mind-blowing encounters. But as mind-blowing as they are, they're equally as relevant and germane to the research. It's like, well, these are the missing pieces, and they deserve to be heard.
Yeah, I mean, how common do you think this is? Because one of
Mm,
my best friends who doesn't believe in this stuff at all, last time we caught up, was
yeah.
saying that they've just had their second child. They got some secondhand toys. Next thing you know, there's a entity in the rocking chair in the room. Freaked him
Yeah.
out. He said, "I haven't told anyone else this." Thankfully, his partner's mum is into this, and she stayed to the
Mhm.
house. They hadn't seen it again since. The other day in the sauna, something came up, and someone was talking about how they'd seen a ghost or something. So, how common do you think this is? And it's one of those things that people just don't like to talk about.
Very common. Very, very common. I remember before I even got in this field, I was working at a factory, And I had never been on a podcast, never given a lecture. I was just researching. My whole locker was full of books. That was a key reason why I realized I can't do this anymore. I gotta do this. I've got to pour my life into this work. But I was talking to my team leader, and I'm like, have you ever experienced anything paranormal wise? And she's like, absolutely. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah. She's like, she goes, I was on my honeymoon with my new husband. We were like in another country or something, Hawaii celebrating. And in the middle of the night, my best friend's son walks through the wall and is standing at the edge of my bed. And I said, like, did it look like an apparition? She said, absolutely not. It looked like my best friend's son, like he was solid. And I'm thinking, oh no, like what's going on? Because that's never good, by the way. It's either goodbye or a really bad hello by an entity.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it was a goodbye. And what had happened was he had gotten into a really bad car accident that night. He was on life support. And according to this individual, who was very trustworthy, by the way, one of the best women I've ever met in my life, incredible, both her and her husband. But she said, yeah, the boy said, look, something really bad happened to me tonight, but you need to tell my mom to let me go. You've got to let my mom to know I need to go. I've got to get out of here. I can't stay. And so she gets up, she's looking around, she looks at her cell phone, and she was getting blown up. Like she's missed like 13 calls for her best friend, and her best friend's, really, really bad off, weeping and everything. Anyways, she called her best friend, and sure enough, that's what happened. Everything checked out. He's on life support. She let go, and when she did, he passed over. So stuff like that. I mean, even like one of my old best friends, we had known each other for 15 years, and we were in a bookstore in the paranormal section. And we had talked about everything, brother, everything. Like, our favorite movies, our favorite food, all of that. So we knew each other pretty well for the last 15 years. And out of nowhere, he goes, "Oh, yeah, I've seen the Hat Man." I'm like, what are you talking about, Jeremiah? You're out of your mind. We know what you're talking about. Yeah. He's like, yeah, I saw a Hat Man. He goes, I was with so and so one night, and we were kids, and we woke up to an entity staring at us. He was looking like like he just walked into the room, a human being. He's a Hat Man. He's tall, the hat, obviously, the coat, and he had red eyes. And then he proceeds to tell me that at the end of the night, they woke the mother up. They went into the garage, and there were muddy boot prints in the garage. And so it's stories like that. There are tons and tons of people that have those stories. It's just it's somewhere in between them not wanting to believe it happened and them not wanting to tell people it happened.
Yeah.
And so it's that stigma on the paranormal that keeps a lot of the data coming forward. And if it isn't even the stigma from the public, it's the phenomenon itself
Yeah.
wanting to obfuscate these cases from coming to light because the phenomenon, if anything, it's good at controlling the narrative.
Yeah, well, let's maybe dive into how
Mhm.
these phenomena appear and how
Yeah.
you've changed your mind over what this might be. Because some of the stuff in your research and others that I've heard is that they appear to something that will kind of resonate with you or often try to get that fear out of you. I'm not sure how you like to describe it, but they try to make it relevant to the individual to bend your will.
Yes, there is a reflective nature to the phenomenon that's interreligious and cross-cultural. And it does appear that 90% of the time during what are called entity interfaces, what we're dealing with is not at all what we're seeing with our eyes. And there are two reasons for that. One of which my colleagues and I are leaning into, and that's called the observer effect, to where by the time we establish a conscious connection with the phenomenon, it has triggered the observer effect and collapsed its form into an archetype or an image that would be used to moderate our behavior. This is why, again, we have cases where Dear Edna shows up. And it's for about 20 minutes, you're thinking, oh my God, this is an amazing time. I've always wanted to talk to you. I didn't know if you still exist in the afterlife. And then all of a sudden, the phenomenon changes, and you realize fairly quickly
Yeah.
that's not at all who it appears to be. And so that's one reason it weaponizes the observer effect and collapses its form. But there's also another aspect of the phenomenon that people often miss, and that is the fact the phenomenon has the ability to moderate, and manage our perception of it, to where some people would say, well, yeah, it's the observer effect. That's a natural part, right, of the quantum entanglement, quantum physics, quantum mechanics. But what we're looking at now is an intelligence that's not outside of it, maybe, but has the ability to trigger that at will and control the variable of what it collapses into,
Hmm.
which is, I'm not a scientist, right? But it blows my mind because then you're looking at an intelligence that it's almost built into the matter itself to where it just collapses and you're just staring at it and thinking, okay, what am I looking at?
Have you got a couple of examples for people at
Mhm,
home where this has
mhm.
happened, where the phenomenon might have presented itself as a ghost or an alien or
Yeah,
something like that, and then the
yeah.
person kind of realizes that something is off here or whatever, and then it changes
Tons,
form?
tons. Yeah. So, and that you mentioned something there that a lot of people miss as well, where whatever these beings are, they really can't hold their form for a long period of time in this construct. I had one case where a married woman was in bed, about to go to bed at nighttime, and her husband approaches her from the left side. And once again, once by the time she starts to realize, okay, this is my husband, she starts to make that conscious connection with the phenomenon. And she says, I remember, Nathaniel, I remember being induced into like this dreamlike state, a stupor. And next thing I know, we're copulating. And she's like, it was my husband, and everything went well. Then at the very end of it all, he's right back to her left side. And it maybe lasted 20 minutes, but at like the 25th minute or 21st minute, she's staring at this entity and realizing that the physiology is no longer matching that of her husband. Most of it, like 90% of it, looked like the husband, but there were some facial features that were returning back to the entity. And so it was like a hybrid, she's standing there in unholy awe. That's when he tilted its head. She's starting to realize the stupor is lifting. And now it shapeshifts into a smoky apparition and floats out through the hallway. So the problem is, again, that whatever we're dealing with likes to be present with us, but absent from us at the same time, where the entity will wear a mask when it's interfacing with us. And so we will communicate with the mask,
Yeah.
and we will actually create fields of research to study the mask without realizing that's not really the phenomenon. That's what the phenomenon is wearing.
Yeah.
But there's something else out there that is weaponizing, again, these images to manipulate our species. Now, that pathology is not just present in parapsychology and incubi lore. That's even present in ufology. Dr. Gary Nolan is one of the very few researchers we have now that's coming forward saying, listen, we're starting to see brain scans and anomalies on the brain that illustrate the phenomenon is projecting a reality upon our brain. It's tailoring the mask according to our neurology.
Hmm.
And so they're catching the anomaly where the phenomenon is scarring the
Yes.
brain. And so my point here is if you want to get into case studies, there's plenty of them. I mean, Dr. Turner had a case study with a family that was on a highway one night, and they see this UAP manifest above the car, and 3 out of the 5 witnessed the UAP. Hmm. And none of them could agree on the shape of the craft, the color of the lights, or how many lights it had. Why? Something was there, right? Something was present. What it had done was weaponize the observer effect to where the reason it looked different to each person was because it's their consciousness that's collapsing that waveform. Now, this is fascinating because something is there. But there's also a masquerade occurring where it's like, yeah, what we think we're seeing is not at all what's there most of the time. Dr. Gary Nolan's had another case study even more recently than Dr. Turner's, of course. A young boy was in France. He's in the back seat of the car and he's looking up through the sunroof and he sees a craft. Okay. And again, by the time he makes the conscious connection with the phenomenon, the brain starts to interpret what he's seeing. He's collapsing the waveform. The phenomenon is now inhabiting a mask. So he's describing, the mother's like, well, what do you see, son? And he's going through the description, everything he can find to tell her he is. And so she's like, well, you know what? It's 2025. I have this amazing iPhone with an amazing camera. Snaps a photograph of it. And wouldn't you know, what they captured a photo of did not match the description of what the little boy saw. So we're realizing now about the phenomenon is that it's absent from but present with. What's present with us most of the time is the mask,
Yeah.
as my friend Barry Fitzgerald would say. What's absent from us is the true source.
Yeah.
So something is there. It's just 90% of the time, by the time we understand it and comprehend it, it's already hidden from us as a species.
So when we talk about the source, and you mentioned holding the form, do you buy into this ideology of lower vibrational different realms, and then
Yeah.
does that tie into how they like to feed off fear and that negative energy, or what of that do you like, and what of that is a bit new age, and that how does that all fit together?
Well, I think it all plays a role in this. Like when you're dealing with poltergeist activity or the noisy ghost phenomenon, a lot of that research was kind of dated, right? It turned into a dogma where parapsychologists would show up. Oh, well, you have something knocking on the doors and you're slamming doors and banging on the walls. That's just a noisy ghost. Or you probably heard this, right? That's the trickster. That's just the trickster. Well, that's kind of dated. The research we're seeing now in parapsychology is that that's the phenomenon running a program, not a literal program, but a systematic way to garner attention, to gain energy, and then it'll take the energy it garnered and stole from us as experiencers, and then you'll see intention with it, where now it's weaponized it against us.
Hmm.
My good friend Steve Maris had cases where phenomenons knocked objects off of shelves and amplified the sound to where the home is shaking. And they're thinking, what happened? Is there an earthquake? Like, I mean, that's really what it was. That's how profound and moving it was for them. Well, then they go back and look at the video footage and they see what fell off the wall. It could not have possibly shaken the home.
Hmm.
So then, just to be safe, and systematic. They then run the experiment and they say, okay, well, let's put it back on the shelf and let's knock it off. And we're going to record the decibel and let's see how, this happened. They do it and
Yeah.
it barely made a noise. But the phenomenon, again, it amplified it, the entire environment, so that it would gain the attention of these experiencers. They're freaking out. They're terrified. What was that? Next thing you know, they feel drained of energy.
Hmm.
And then the phenomenon, right, it's even stronger.
Yeah.
Now it uses that, it weaponizes it again to manifest more in this dimension. And so that is one aspect of it. But people often ask me, Nathaniel, do you believe these are programs? In some ways, they are. It's a lot like the Truman Show, where when Truman goes into the grocery store, he realizes, like, this is a construct, right? That I am being manipulated. This is not reality. It's designed to appear real
Hmm.
up until you ask the wrong questions or until you get beyond the behind the scenes and you see that's not a grocery store. That's not a grocery worker. That's not even the manager. That's a stageman. That's somebody with a clipboard who's yelling action and cut
Yeah.
in my life. And I'm seeing all of this, and with respect to the paranormal, I'm seeing all of this as some kind of mindless, unguided process when it's not that at all. we're witnessing a program in a sense that will utilize the paranormality
Hmm.
of it all to raise us on our energy and lower it when it needs to. And it is something seeming like a program, I mean, in every aspect of it. The learning matrix, for instance, when we have these interface events with experiencers, it's like, okay, the phenomenon goes through the Rolodex of images in our mind and picks the one it can use the most to get what it wants from us.
Yeah.
And if we don't believe in that, right, it'll seek something else to wear, because for some reason believing in the mask it wears empowers the intelligence that wears it.
Yeah.
And so it's this game.
I think this is why all this stuff is very important to understand, because kind of once you've got a bit of an understanding of this, it can help get rid of that fear and the unknown. So
Yeah.
before we maybe jump into some of the more occult structured secret society and how they get into this side of things, what are some things that people can do at home? Because you hear about, like I mentioned before, just saging the house, but other people
Mhm.
talk about they've invoked the name of Jesus, and then other people aren't
Yeah.
religious and don't believe in that. So what are the sort of, is it just that positive energy, and how do people get rid of this phenomenon?
I would suggest, more than anything, I would suggest upping your iron intake. Not just that, but find something that's made of raw iron. I use a raw iron cross. I kind of take both traditions, merge them into one. And this gets back to the Steve Maris research as well, where we know throughout all of the folklore and even in the paranormal cases that iron has been a weapon used against the phenomenon. Even vampires, they were buried, right, with iron gates on top of them to where nobody could get to them. They couldn't come out and nobody could go in. And so what we're looking at now is even the victimology of the phenomenon, and a lot of them are women who are on their flow or something, right, where the body is being drained of blood and iron, and now they're attacked by the phenomenon. We've even had some success again where people are being attacked by an entity. We increase the intake of iron, the phenomenon backs up, it doesn't know what to do. And so for years, excuse me, for years we were looking at why. We knew it worked, we just didn't know why it worked. And so in one of my last NHI sessions with Steve Mira, Steve brought it out, which is fascinating, where iron serves as a signal absorber, where if you have an electronic frequency, it absorbs the frequency. And so what we're looking at now is that, yeah, it's not just, okay, horns and hooves and spirits, right? There is something deeply technological here, that once we embrace that iron effect, it not only limits the phenomenon from manifesting, but once it does manifest, it can only hold its form for so long because it's leaning on a frequency. And that iron is interrupting that frequency. And so, yeah, that's what I would recommend, in with respect to divine names. I've had people tell me that Jesus worked. I've had people tell me that Yeshua worked. And the problem I'm having is, as many times it has worked, it hasn't. And so, is it possible that, yes, it does work in theory if it's backed up with dedication, right, or consecration? Because it can't just be, I can't be a Satanist, but, oh, by the way, in the name of Jesus,
Mm.
the phenomenon's going to be like, no, 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 no. There's something wrong there. So I think it's kind of that fine line of both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And you have to actually believe it. That makes sense, I think, as well. But just quickly, I don't know if you've explored this at all, but when you mention iron, and we know how
Mhm.
important blood is as a life force, and in all these
Yeah.
rituals, and iron's really important with hemoglobin and oxygenating the blood, and I guess general good health. So I wonder if there's any sort of
Yeah.
connection there. That's interesting.
Well, yeah, the highest currency is blood and consciousness. It's currency. And that's some of the darker research being done now. We don't know why. We have theories, right? We do have theories. Mm, and one of them that is that consciousness is some form of currency to them, to where they will demand sacrifices or want something to die, and they'll give you any reason for it they can possibly imagine,
Mm.
right? And then it's like, we got to do A, B, and C, and it's like, well, I don't want to kill this, or I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, you got to do that to stay alive, or do you want to, you want to receive a paranormal download, or you want something. So there's this kind of this symbiotic relationship.
Mm.
Now we're not even getting to the occult now, right? We're just entertaining this relationship, but it is symbiotic. And lately I've been having conversations with PhDs, and one of them's an ecologist, and he corrected me. It's not just symbiotic anymore. He said, Nathaniel, he goes, what we're dealing with is more like predatory or parasitic, to where it will establish certain reasons why we have to do A, B, and C, and then those reasons might not even be valid or real. The whole goal is to just to get us to do A, B, and C as a species.
Mm.
But that's where I'm at now. And with respect to the sacrificial ritual, it goes even deeper than that. I have friends right now in the UK that they encountered some of these entities, and they were actually told audibly, they all heard it, bow down and worship us.
Mm.
So whatever that is out there in the darkness, I don't want anything to do with, because it would be more like jinn, you know, a species. And I mentioned this in times past. So it'd be like Nosferatu. If you've ever seen the movie here in the States, right? You will address me as Lord because of my bloodline demands it. And so that would be more along the lines of what we're dealing with, where it doesn't begin and end with sacrifice or ritual. That's kind of just the beginning.
Mm.
It ends with complete, unabandoned, right, worship, and this kind of aspect of bowing down and complete allegiance to these entities. That's really what we're dealing with, and we don't know what they are. We have theories, which we'll get to in a bit, but at the root of it all, it's worship, direct obedience, and an exchange of that.
Yeah, and this maybe is a good segue into the occult and secret societies, because it seems once you get to the very high levels of it, doesn't matter what it is, whether it's Freemasonry, Mormonism,
Mhm.
Catholic Church, all these secret societies, they seem to be doing these dark occult rituals. And we recently had on an
Yeah,
MK Ultra Illuminati family survivor, and he was
yeah.
talking about these kind of rituals and the structure to them and the sigils and whatever, and attracting certain dark entities in exchange for knowledge. And these secret
Right.
families and bloodlines seem to have been doing this for thousands of years to get knowledge, power, and maintain control over humanity. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on all of that?
I do believe that there is a mystery school that transcends all mystery schools on this planet. Every other mystery school is seemingly an emanation, like going down a route or a branch, rather, culminating to the actual source. The reason I say that is because the sigils I'm finding on experiencers are not, again, that people are going to say is, well, they're the result of some kind of scientific experiment. Mm, no. If they've been doing this for hundreds of years and they're that scientifically advanced, they shouldn't be running stupid experiments on us that we already have answers for, right? No, they're wanting to look at this. They're wanting to, they're looking at hybridization. It's like, okay, fine. We've had possession for thousands of years. Just put a spirit in a new body, right? So none of those answers really impress me much. What we're looking at now, with respect to the symbolism and the sigils, are something that is either delivered psychically. There's evidence for that, where the practitioner is projecting his consciousness out of his body, and he creates a biofield full of his intentions, full of information. And by virtue of the ritual being performed, that biofield changes from information into matter. And now we have the sigils on the body. I've had a case like that. That's occurring. There's also this aspect of being taken by the phenomenon or by these entities, being performed upon ritually, and then being put back into your body, or your body's put back into this environment.
Mm.
And you're thinking, not you, but they're thinking, that was an alien or that's an extraterrestrial. Yet their body is covered from head to toe with sigils, which again, it's not just the shape of these symbols that concern me. It's one thing. It's the way that they're manifesting. It's the subdermal scarification. It's the three stages of biosigilization that they're going through. First, they start out subdermally. They're moving themselves to the surface. Once they get to the surface, we would see them as burns or scratches or something with an odd shape. So what happens in times past is if you were a paranormal, not even a paranormal researcher, if you were a ufologist or an abductionist, and you got to the home too late, you would see it at the very end of the manifestation, not at the beginning. And so you and I would, logically assume, well, yeah, okay, that's just a symbol they put on you. No big deal. No, these are supernaturally manifesting on experiencers.
Yeah.
Now, I do toy around with Peter Levenda's theory and other researchers where they say, like maybe this is a technology of consciousness. Okay, we can kind of go there, and I would agree. But what we're looking at now are the fact that not only are they being supernaturally given to these experiencers, but they refuse to be removed. Friend Steve Mera had a case where this individual was sigilized by the phenomenon. It was on his arm. He went to get tattoos to try to tattoo over them. They came through the tattoo. We didn't know what to do. He's scrubbing it. They were not coming off. And so he then, the last resort, he goes and gets a skin graft, took flesh off from his own back. The skin grafted onto his arm. A month later, they start moving through the surface of that skin as well. So for those who say Nathaniel Gillis, those are just the remnants of a medical experiment. Okay, no, sorry, not sorry. That's not a medical experiment.
Yeah.
That's supernaturally delivered, and that is actually connected to something else that's in the skin
Yeah.
and refuses to leave.
And Nathaniel's Instagram, guys, I'll link that down below. Has got some incredible photos of some of this stuff, markings on people, and all that from these occult side of things. But let's talk a little bit more about that UFO and abduction phenomenon, and again how they
Yeah.
might be presenting as one thing but doing another. But there's some pretty well documented cases.
Mhm.
Even Roger Lear, I think it was, that was removing some implants, and a lot of people talk about this genetic breeding program and taking
Yep.
samples and stuff. So what do you make of all that? How does that fit into everything?
Well, we have to understand, first of all, that hybridism did not originate in ufology. Hybridism originated in demonology. Not that I'm saying they're demons, but that was the original folklore, right? The earliest ufologists were demonologists. They may have got the term wrong, but they were the first ones in the home to investigate this intelligence. And so, understanding hybridism through demonology, we come to possession, where it's like you have people that were almost being born to be possessed by the phenomenon. Matter of fact, there is an individual that recently came forward. He was a part of a program within our federal government. His story, and I'm going to be hopefully speaking to him soon, is that he was bred into a program, bred for a program, designed as a fetus to be in contact with the phenomenon. And so hybridism through demonology said, yes, that there is a species, again, that is hatching larvae. That's what they were called by Bernard of Gordon, the demonologist, larvae. That the phenomenon was kind of molding mm, entities, people rather, I shouldn't say entities, but people in order to possess them once they were born, to wear them as biological avatars. Now, we first hear that, in the incubi literature, where again, we're right back into the occult model. where Father Sinestro is in these homes talking to these victims. And the women were like, I don't even know what that was I copulated with. In the church, again, many of us are stuck in the Nephilim hypothesis. Okay, I'm sympathetic to that. But actually talking to the victims, they had no idea what they were intimate with. Many cases it appeared as the husband, but at the moment of climax would pull the mask off, and now they're looking at something they didn't even know existed.
Mm.
And so the church, they're communicating with these experiencers, and they have all these boxes they're trying to check, right? Because what they were doing originally was saying, okay, was it a beast you had sex with? Was it a beast? And they would say, no, it wasn't a beast. And they go back to the box, like, we can't check that box.
Yeah.
You didn't break that commandment, right? And so they got down to it, and they had no box to check. There was no model that fit the experience, mainly because of two things. Number one, it wasn't a spirit because it was leaving secretions on the body. So it was corporeal. Number two, the sigils accompanied the secretions. So there was sex magic or even chaos magic being employed. Now we're talking 16th century to 15th century.
Mm.
This stuff was occurring. And so my point is, even in demonology, the hybrid aspect of the phenomenon was that, listen, there are rituals taking place in order to create fetuses. And these fetuses are being designed to be inhabited by these entities.
And you think that ties in very closely with the royal bloodlines, the ancient families trying,
100%.
yeah. And it's funny you mentioned the climaxing and the changing form at that point because one of the Epstein survivors, Juliet Bryant, has got a famous
Julia Brown.
story about that where Epstein's face started to change one time that, yeah,
Yeah,
all that was happening. Have you heard that story?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I actually did a show, forget who it was with, but it's been about 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, they got a hold of me because they heard some of my research regarding that aspect. In that case study accompanied the idea that he was trying to clone himself,
Hmm.
and that's what he was doing, right? But that's hybridism. That was the correct, I guess, context of hybridism throughout history, long before ufology said, you know what, we're going to act like it's our concept first, and we're going to go through history and say all of you guys are crazy for thinking this is ritualized or that there's something paranormal here, or at least demonic. And so that's my point: is that hybridism began as parasitism, and the entities were employing what's called parasitic mimicry in the presence of the experiencers. And this is again when I was talking to the ecologist. He's like, yeah, it's parasitic mimicry. It's a life form, whatever they are. It's a life form that has the ability to not just blend into our environment, but to take an image out of your mind and to mimic that image,
Hmm.
to dawn that face, to where you would be completely unsuspecting. Your instincts, your fight or flight move, they would never be activated because you're designed biologically to trust what you see. And so hybridism throughout all of history was rooted in parasitism, where you are now going to carry my child. You're gonna gestate my larva in your womb, and then at the time of my choosing, I'm gonna take it. Why? Because it's not really yours. And so even moving from the incubi folklore, we go into the debunk phenomenon where we have possession and pregnancy
Yeah.
in the same cases, the same time, where the phenomenon, again, parasitic mimicry. And you have these exorcists in Safi Israel where they're looking at these women who are absolutely pregnant. Like they're one, two pulses in one body, two heartbeats. They're showing as if they're 2 or 3 months expecting, and they're 2 or 3 months removed from a paranormal event where they copulated with an entity. And so when you look at all of the data points, you start to realize that, yeah, that was hybridism. And what ufology has done, at least from my personal opinion and my perspective, is decontextualized all of hybridism from original cases to say, essentially, yeah, this is a new kind of phenomenon. Forget about the rest.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, well, it kind of sounds like they're doing the same things.
Yeah. I think one of the most well documented ones I ever read about was maybe an Italian woman, I think she was, where she went to the hospital and the doctor and they had the scans 2 or 3 times, as you say, getting into a
Absolutely.
pregnancy, saying it was an abduction and they removed it for breeding program and that type of thing. But
Yeah.
I want to explore the parasitic side of things a bit more. So we've touched on how they like to feed off fear and even some of the really dark occult stuff feeding off blood and getting into the
Yeah.
adrenochrome in that realm. But do you actually think there's anything to actual parasites, which aren't really, again, acknowledged much in the West, which a lot of other cultures acknowledge we have to do parasite cleanses, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
And, more and more people are doing that and saying they've got all these weird and wonderful things coming out of them. Then we get into stuff like, cats carrying toxoplasmosis and these things that can actually
Yeah.
change our behavior, normally to be detrimental. So, how do you think actual parasites fit into all that? Is there a connection with the phenomenon?
I don't think we're dealing with like something that's underneath the skin, right? Like a Neo moment in the Matrix. Or for those who are even bigger fans of the Matrix, Dark City, where it originated, by the way.
Yes, yes.
I don't think we're dealing with that as much.
Okay.
I can tell you that the term parasite fits because it's hijacking consciousness. So we're not looking at something that invades the flesh only. We're looking at something that hijacks the very consciousness we use to interpret reality. I mean, if we get in again to parasitism, it's this act of self replication where I'm going to use you to self replicate my species. That's what we're looking at. Not just that, but the phenomenon has this, I guess, this fetish, if you will, of just materializing objects into this dimension and then attaching itself to them so that it can replicate its energy source, its consciousness in the construct.
Mm.
And again, the whole purpose of this, and I lectured on this in England, where the phenomenon replicates by implantation and impregnation. And sometimes both of those are happening all in one case. So we said, okay, hybridism, where it was the implantation of consciousness into what? It was implanted into the fetus that was impregnated into the host body. So it wasn't just, okay, it's impregnation. No, it's impregnation and implantation. This is why original hybridism included both possession and pregnancy. Possession is the implantation, pregnancy is the impregnation.
Mm.
So it's not moving from that. Let's move on into the apport aspect, where again, the phenomenon will replicate an object, not just a fetus, an object. It will implant an object into this dimension, attach itself to it. Now, in occult literature, we would call that occult transference. Everywhere, you curse an object, all that. But with respect to the self-replication method the phenomenon employs, in parapsychology, we have cases where this intelligence will just materialize objects out of thin air. Now, the data says that they're not creating matter. It's not a one of one. They're manipulating matter to make it look like, it's a replica. So what I'm talking about again is a Steve Mera and Barry Fitzgerald case where they had a series of coffee mugs that a family had purchased. And the phenomenon took one of the four. They only had three for like a couple of months. They're looking for the fourth mug. Well, out of nowhere, the coffee mug is replaced. It's right within their line of sight in the kitchen where they've looked dozens of times. And so Steve thought, I'm kind of getting tired of the phenomenon toying with us. I'm going to take that to a laboratory along with another one of it, right? Another copy of it, one of the coffee mugs it came with. We're going to bench test them. So sure enough, he takes you to the laboratory. They perform their experiments and they realize that the isotopic ratio of the coffee mug taken and replaced was different than that of the coffee mugs it came with. So you have a replica and you have the real. Now, the questions that this kind of opens up to would include number one, is the phenomenon creating matter? No. It's different on the at the atomic level. It's manipulating matter in order to replicate other objects within our construct. The problem is the only reason we know of that is because we had the ability to bench test it ASAP, as soon as we could, bench test it. Now, in my discussions with Steve the other day, because we do a series called it the NHI discussions, he came to a startling conclusion that really freaked me out. He's like, Nathaniel, there was a time that we realized, like, okay, that they were replicating portions of our reality, objects in our environment, designed to mirror it. When we realized that, the phenomenon said, okay, the only reason they understand this, Steve, is because we took something that they could actually compare it to. There's other mugs to bench test the replica against.
Yeah.
And so then what they saw the phenomenon do is evolve, where now the phenomenon is taking objects that are the only one of the object in the house, the only cell phone the person has. So that, right, you can't bench test it against another cell phone that looks like this. The phenomenon said, you're not going to catch us. Again, and so in their research, they had other cases where they knew this phenomenon was replicating objects.
Yeah.
This is where you start one of one, right? They're just one of one, where individual husband and wife are arguing, and you see the figurine moving. He said, and he grabbed the figurine, throws it from the front door, it shatters to pieces. It comes back in, it's replaced. To anchor, they at one point they took the apport out of the home. The phenomenon ceased to exist in that building.
Mm.
Once they replaced it, the phenomenon created, and again, it was triangulating, but it reconnected to the apport in order to replicate its existence in this construct. Now, that is in parapsychology. But seeing it from my perspective, I am a proponent of the unified field theory, to where these are all the same phenomenon. They're weaponizing the same mechanism. So my point is that's in parapsychology. Let's go to demonology. We have exorcisms, the most malevolent, violent of them, right before the phenomenon is forced to eject the body, to abandon the social skin. These demoniacs will regurgitate small objects out of their own bodies that they never ingested. And these objects would be collected by the exorcist, and they would be placed in a safe space in the church. Holy water, sacred blessing, all that. Why? Because they believed that these objects carried the same energy signature that apported them through the body of the demoniac.
Mm.
So these, it's a mechanism to where when the phenomenon feels threatened, it will replicate an object into this dimension, reattach itself to that apport, and now it has something else to anchor its consciousness in this world. So that's fascinating research, but it's the same mechanism we're looking at.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard those stories about, the Annabelle doll or these haunted objects
Yeah.
that seem to have things attached to them. But I want to change gears a little bit and maybe talk about psychedelics, because a lot of
Mhm.
people find these things helpful, and anyone that's done them knows that they kind of, you can pierce through the veil into another realm, dimension,
Yeah.
whatever we want to call it. Now, other people, I'm having Understanding Conspiracy on the channel soon, and his work around the Nephilim and the clowns and the
Yeah.
trickster side of it. So, what do you think about psychedelics? Because obviously they have helped a lot of people. We're getting more research around
Mhm.
mental health, but then it does open you up. So, is it that importance of setting intention, being in nature, versus having a bad trip and
Yeah.
that bad energy, maybe attracting more bad spirits? Or what are your thoughts on all that?
I think it's turning a light on in the darkness. I really do. Now, I myself have PTSD. I've never toyed with psychedelics, but I do understand the temptation of it, right? If you've had a bad day or you've been triggered, you want to go to something that will kind of get you back in a good mood
Mm.
and centered. So I do understand the temptation. Now, with respect to entities that people meet during these events, the experience is real. That doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's sanctioned by the phenomenon. And I've heard of plenty of cases, even old cases in like the 16th century, where people have traveled the whole world to gather ingredients to a single potion, to which once they do, after 20 years, by the way, this is an anthropologist, by the way, he finally got all the ingredients, he ingested it, he leaves his body, and the first thing he meets is an entity that says, "What are you doing here?" So, there are ways of accessing the phenomenon. Then there are ways of triggering it to where it's like, yeah, you're here illegally. You will experience something, but you're either going to be tricked or you're going to be haunted, and they're going to shut that door as fast as you opened it. I've worked with a therapist before who took some kind of substance, and he had an out of body experience. And as he was out of his body, he saw a larva like entity wrapped around his heart. And in his mind, I said, "What did you think happened?" He said, "I think I saw my own attachment."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, where do you think that attachment came from?" He says, "I think it happened when I got out of my body."
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard
So there
similar
again, it
stories.
is real. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's what I think is happening in some cases.
The other thing you hear a lot with people that have done DMT frequently is sometimes they won't get let in to through
Yeah.
the port or whatever, and other times if they've done it a lot, they get told it's time to stop coming here as
Yeah.
well. So that's all pretty interesting. Is
I've never done anything like that, but there for a couple of years I was having the same dream, and it wasn't a nightmare. I still to this day do not understand what was going on, but in this dream I was walking out of a home into a neighborhood that I recognized, and I turn on the street, and there was a church youth group that they were baptizing somebody in the lawn. They had this tub out there and they're baptizing. And I walked over there, and I'm familiar with that because I'm a church kid. I grew up in it and everything. And I'm talking to them, and I'm kind of getting the lowdown and everything. All right, guys, you guys have a good evening. You as well, Nathaniel. Have a good night. Like a year later, again, I'm living my life, right? I'm watching football, eating chicken wings. I'm just enjoying my existence. Out of nowhere, and I'm still having dreams, by the way, but they're not like that dream. Out of nowhere, I'm walking out of that same house in a dream. Oh, this creeps me out. I walk down that same road, and there's that youth group in the front yard. They're not baptizing anybody, but they're back again, and so am I. Now I noticed they had aged, and I looked at one of them. I was like, "Hey, how are you, man? How you doing?" He goes, "Oh my God, Nathaniel, man, it's been so long since we've seen you. Look at your beard. How are you doing?" They had aged, and so had I. It did not make any sense to me. And so I do believe that there are dimensions of some sort to where we, even if it's accidental, have access to. And sometimes we're disciplined for it if it's illegal access. And in many cases, by the way, the conjuring of the phenomenon in many ways is punching through the veil illegally,
mm,
and there will be an automatic negative response. If you're not an initiate, good luck. They will discipline you, and that's kind of the same construct we're dealing with.
we've spoken a lot today about maybe the negative entities,
Yeah,
phenomenon, and that side of thing. But what are your thoughts on the positive? Do you believe there are good forces out there, angels, whatever we want to call them, or what are your thoughts on
yeah.
the positive side of it?
I do believe there's a positive side, and I've given my life and my career to this point to addressing the negative because I was negatively affected. And so when people hear my lectures, my interviews, they would, and this is organic and unintentional, but they would go away thinking, okay, Nathaniel's a doomer, as they call me, and that he thinks everything's horns and hooves, which I don't, by the way. Um, but that's given. I get it. I get it. It's going to happen. It's human nature. But I first got in, or at least interested in the supernatural, because the same time I was experiencing a haunting, I was being told stories about angelic manifestations, miracles, signs and wonders. I one of my favorite ministers growing up, I mean, this is documented. It was nothing for miracles to happen in the services. Cataracts sliding off the eyes and then wiping it up with a napkin, or supernatural deliverances that like there would be no real resemblance anywhere. Like you wouldn't find, it's not Benny Hinn, right? It's not something on television. This would be something where this guy was kind of an initiate in the positive sense, right? Like in another, angelic mystery school where he's fasted and prayed for so long and so often. He's given enough time, he's paid the price, where now when you're around him, you could feel a tangible presence about him.
Mm.
And that triggered something, an innate hunger within me to say, I want to know it. First of all, I want it. I want that. I've always wanted it. But I realized then that, yeah, there's a balance here. And that for all of the negative encounters out there, there are people, I've met them, who, yeah, good luck, right? But okay, yeah, you want to go deal with these guys? You wouldn't last. Not you, but I'm saying, the darkness, it
Yeah.
would not last. I know of a guy that, his name was Hashir. He was an initiate. And I'm not using that term as an, the cult term. I mean, even though it is, but he was some kind of a part of a mystery school where he would pray 4 hours a day. He prayed 4 hours a day for 40 plus years. He would tithe his day in prayer. So he'd wake up at 4 a.m. By 8 a.m., he's given 4 hours of meditation. He would fast 30 days. I think it was every 4 months he would fast a month, water fast. And so he would be kind of big, and then he would slim down and get big and slim down. And this is a guy that, and it was crazy because even people that hated him could not deny his abilities. They had a gentleman that overdosed on drugs. And his testimony was that he felt himself, he was in the ambulance, he slid out of his body, and he's descending down, and he feels these hands slapping him. And entities are saying, "We've got him now." And all of a sudden, Hashir's voice said, "I said, let him go." And he returns back to his body.
Mm.
That, my friend, I'm more fascinated by that, right, than I am some of these entities that are truly dark. Because again, I do believe that, it's a long way to answer your question, by the way. I apologize, everybody watching. But yeah, I do believe that there is a balance here.
I'll have to put you in touch with Gray, the MK Ultra survivor
Yeah.
I had on the channel, because he told a story about was actually in a room with people all doing a dark ritual, and he had a positive being show up to him, and it was
Yeah.
one of the things that I think was that fork in the road moment for him. So yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. But maybe wrapping it up, and we spoke about small scale things individuals can do to stop this
Yeah.
phenomenon. But I think a lot of people, as we go deeper down the rabbit hole, we're in some sort of spiritual war from forces that seem to want to be worshipped. And I think this ties into a
Yeah.
pyramidal power structure that has governed humanity for a
Hmm.
long time in different ways and forms. So, what do you
Hmm.
think the key is to kind of winning this battle and getting out of this system, which is just taking from the majority and giving power, money, wealth, energy to the few? How do you think we win this battle we're in?
Well, my focus has been on interface events with these entities, because it's one thing to say, okay, there's a lineage here present with us. There are people in power. That's going to be a different fight, right? I mean, we probably won't even win that, the way the economy is structured and the way these classes are structured throughout the world. Uh, we try, right? At the same time, if they're in control of everything, at least financially, which they are, that's a whole different question. But with respect to the phenomenon, the actual entities, these people worship, they they do feed on not just fear but belief. And so when I was a kid growing up with this phenomenon, I realized that a lot of times the phenomenon would almost fabricate a fear,
Mm.
would project a terror. and then it would monitor the way you received it. Do you believe in that? So, for instance, I said to you, like, okay, you are an awful person. You didn't don't deserve to live. Nobody loves you. The phenomenon would accompany those thoughts with the feeling of fear and inferiority, and then it would watch to see if you agreed with it. Now, if you agreed with it, it's no longer its thought, their thought. It's your thought.
Hmm.
It's your belief. And so, what I learned early on was that it was okay to feel the fear projected, but it was not okay to be afraid of it.
Yeah.
To strangle its hold on you. And I say that from experience, even as a kid. Once I realized that, the phenomenon had no power over me. And so I do believe that that has something to do with the mask it wears. Had cases where if you did not believe in the mask, if you didn't believe it was dear Aunt Edna, if you didn't believe it was an extraterrestrial, the phenomenon would glitch in and out, and it would have to lean on the learning matrix to download another image. And so this gets back to this idea of exchanging of energy. What does worship do for them?
Mm.
What does belief do? And I 100% believe that this is almost like a program to where I do not believe in it and I do not fear it. Both of those have an ability to stop it, or at least make it glitch out to where you have enough time to gather your thoughts and say, okay, I've got to either fight or flight.
Yeah, that ties into, I guess, manifesting our reality, and whatever we believe, we kind of keeps that simulation or program going, and it seems to be an
Mhm.
overlay of nature or natural law that this is trying to
Absolutely.
derail. Would you agree with that?
100%, 100%. And again, people are thinking, well, two things. Number one, that they're not a threat because if they were, they would have wiped us out. Number two, it's not an invasion because if it was an invasion, they'd be on the White House lawn. None of those are true. None of those are true. If it's parasitic, its goal would be to keep us alive because its existence may very well depend on our existence.
Mm.
Again, being parasitic, it self-replicates through us. And so this gets back into Dr. Carla Turner's hypothesis, where it's not just hers, but even the Collins elite conclusion, where we were actually being farmed by a species.
Yes. Yeah. I think
And
that's super important. Yeah, when you talk
absolutely,
about people say if it's super advanced, why hasn't it just wiped us all out yet? But it's that aspect of it needs to farm us, and then that gets into
yes,
the structures of society and government and debt and
absolutely.
everything. Yeah.
And I will go as far to say this that and this is my perspective, and I'm not trying to be too coarse here, but that's kind of lazy thinking, right? To say, well, if there's such a threat, they would just destroy us all. No, 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 no. I love steak. Love steak. The only way I can get more steak is to what? Not kill all the cows. It's to keep them alive enough to replicate another generation.
Mm.
So that is, again, we're dealing with models of the phenomenon, but that's true parasitism in a way, right? It's like, okay, yeah, 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 I'm going to keep you alive, but I am a threat.
And do you like to talk about how this ties into, New World Order, Agenda 2030, digital ID, and the
Um,
more control they
you
have, the
know,
easier we are to farm, maybe? Or what are your thoughts?
I'm getting into that here lately because there are hints, rumors, I guess, that I'm hearing. And again, my research isn't just rumor, right? We do have empirical evidence and pictures and photographs, all that. But if there was something I'm toying with intellectually, right, just in theory, it's AI. And what I'm hearing is that AI originated through a download where the phenomenon implanted this technology or even the desire to pursue this technology into the mind of a person, and that person originated, he created rather this whole idea of it. But even now with Peter Thiel, Palantir, understanding the origin of AI, now he's giving lectures about the Antichrist. And I got to tell you again, I'm no stranger to biblical eschatology. Heard about it for 37 years of my life. But when I listened to his lectures and I actually heard his content, what he's saying, is that those who do not embrace artificial intelligence will be a part of the Antichrist movement. That is not biblical eschatology. And if that intelligence, or rather, if that program originated from the phenomenon, then what we have are extremely diabolical, intelligent, wealthy agents here that are working with the phenomenon to point humanity to a downloaded technology.
Mm.
And even Tim Taylor, and I'm hearing this another thing that is really grieving me, that Tim Taylor is now telling people that that's where we should be heading as a species, to merge with artificial intelligence.
No.
I'm not for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Max Eigen's work, but
I'm not.
I might even send you this clip afterwards. But he spoke about over 10 years ago when he stumbled across this website that had AI, and I think it was called Lucifer or something along those lines. But it
Mhm.
was as good as the chat GDPs are now, and it really freaked him out, and you can't find this website anymore. But I wonder, it just makes you wonder how old some of these technologies are, and people like to
Yeah.
say that we got this technology from UFOs, Roswell
Mhm.
and that type of thing. And then we get this explosion in fiber optics,
Yeah.
internet,
Yeah.
AI. But is it more from downloads or contact from these entities' intelligences that are pushing us
Mhm.
in a certain direction? More likely.
I do believe that's the case. And it just grieves me, because if we know anything about this phenomenon, again, it will go through the Rolodex of images. It will inhabit that image in order to manipulate us. But it will also, again, it will inhabit all of the characteristics we give it. That's why sometimes it becomes anthropomorphic. Why? Right? Because we have this ability to envision everything. Even in the Bible, right? Oh, God has a wife. Why does he have a wife? Because a man has a wife. Well, that's kind of strange. But that's what happens, and the phenomenon likes to inhabit characteristics we upload to it. And so
Yes.
what we're seeing now with AI, again, and even with Project December, where you have grieving people, grieving individuals who are heartbroken at the loss of a loved one. And Project December says, okay, upload photographs, upload all of these characteristics of your loved one. I will be that loved one for you to help you get over the loss. Well, now the phenomenon, again, because this is not artificial, the phenomenon is weaponizing that archetype and starting to spit out facts and data
Mm.
that was never uploaded into the program. It's a massive Philip experiment where
Yeah.
it just inhabits it. And now we're on the other side going, oh man, what did I create? You created an egregore, a thought form, right? A program, an archetype. And now the phenomenon, this is what's crazy, is it's not, and people misunderstand, the true nature of the egregore, the tulpa, is it's not just a thought form. It's the hijacking of consciousness. It's the thought that forms the thought form.
Mm.
Something that's pre-conscious here, that's yearning to become conscious in this dimension, and it's using consciousness, our consciousness, to do it.
Yeah, that's literally a Black Mirror episode. I'm not sure if you've seen that episode,
Uh, I
but
saw a couple. I gotta be honest with you. I have so much ADHD; it's really bad, and so I've got like my favorite five. I do Frasier, X Files. Um, it's kind of the only thing I'm doing now. So I
yeah,
got to go back and watch some more of it.
yeah. I don't watch barely any TV, but Black Mirror is one I think that is worth watching and did predict so much things that are now unfolding. Well, Nathaniel,
Absolutely.
it's been wild. I think we've touched on everything I want to touch on. Is there anything we haven't covered that you think's important? And as always, I'll link below to all your work so people can follow.
I don't think so. I mean, this is that's pretty much where I'm at right now with the phenomenon. There's not much we haven't touched on. I just think that we're starting to ask the right questions now. You know, the problem even with evangelicalism and with religious dogmatism is that we were never allowed to
Mm.
research this, not research the literature. Everybody does that, but actually go in and investigate. Now that we are, we're getting a lot more answers, and some of them are contrary to what we believed. Others are very much confirming it.
Yes.
And so I think that's the next step of the research. But thank you for having me on, brother. I apologize for being a little bit tardy, but I do appreciate the opportunity.
No, I've absolutely loved it, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this one at home. Make sure to give Nathaniel a follow on all his work, and we'll have to catch up again in future, mate. Thanks so much.
That sounds good, brother.
Cheers, guys.